The appeal of colonial environments in the modernist age, so roughly between 1890 and 1950, not only sparked new sciences to establish themselves and use the colonial as subject matter for their discipline, these colonial environments also greatly resonated with a wider audience through its promise to disclose the new, the unknown, the exotic. The title of Matthias Fiedler's seminal study, Zwischen Abenteuer, Wissenschaft und Kolonialismus, between adventure, science, and colonialism, already indicates the clear link, particularly for the German colonial context, between science, colonial endeavors, and the popular interest for the adventurous nature of almost any colonial undertaking, which I think Professor Bauer has also demonstrated in his presentation. As a case in point, Fiedler shows how the development of ethnology as a discipline in Germany was linked with travel literature and scientific reports that are adventurous in tone. Literature echoed and processed these new scientific reports, popularizing and shaping them for a wider audience. A salient example of this interaction lies within the history of medicine, which, confronted with new colonial environments, was prompted to develop new cures and ways of dealing with the white man's grave, which was the nickname or the name that was often given to sub-Saharan Africa. To understand the literary processing of medicine, however, we first need to take a step back and set the scene for stories of illness and cures, namely the Belgian and German colonial empires. At the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885, the now infamous King Leopold II acquired the territory of the present-day Democratic Republic of Congo, more or less. In so doing, Leopold II acquired a territory that was over 80 times the size of the motherland, and which would be called Congo Free State, a term that has a very cynical ring to it nowadays. The term refers to the agreement that Congo would be a haven for international free enterprise and a shining example in the battle against slavery, which served as one of the ideological justifications of the colonial endeavor in Africa. From 1885 to 1908, the Free State remained the king's personal property, allowing him to rule it as an early modern despot and seek returns on his investment in the form of rubber, cheap laborers, gold, and other minerals. From 1908 onwards, the Congo Free State became Belgian Congo, as the king was pressured to donate his colony to the Belgian state after strong international criticism concerning the ruthlessness of Belgian colonial officials. The German Empire, on the other hand, sought to establish its Platz unter der Sonne, or place under the sun, after the German unification. The result was that the German Empire acquired Deutsch Ostafrika, now Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and a part of Kenya, Deutsch Südwestafrika, now Namibia and a part of Botswana, Cameroon, present-day Cameroon and part of Nigeria, and Togoland, present-day Togo and part of Ghana. After the First World War, however, Germany lost its colonies on account of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. As an application of scientific knowledge within colonial environments, I would like to discuss two novels that use these territories as scenery for their fiction. The first novel, Tropenwee, from 1904, was written by the Dutch author and journalist Henri van Gogh. Among his many other literary works, Tropenwee was his only colonial novel, which is often compared to the colonial classic Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, because of its fin de siècle themes of transgression, moral failure, and degeneration. Tropenwee tells the story of Jules, with the apt nickname the White One, who travels to Congo to work for a Dutch trading house. Jules represents a weak, highly sensitive, and sentimental figure, and embodies a crisis of conventional, epic heroic masculinity of the fin de siècle era. His voyage to Inner Congo is cut short by a bad case of malaria, and he is forced to return home, while his life and mental sanity hang by a thread. He also witnesses firsthand how the indigenous are abused for economic gain, and how corruption, alcoholism, and violence form part of the colonial environment. The work was received as a critique of colonialism, for which Van Boven was in turn heavily criticized by colonial proponents, although he later denied having ever been critical of the Belgian colonization, years after the publication of Tropenwee. Germanin, then, was written in 1938 by Helmut Unger, a prolific writer specialized in what Stefan Besser describes as medical novels, a genre that took scientific breakthroughs or discoveries as a central theme. The book stems from an era of Nazi rule in which authors like Unger helped shape the racist hygienic logic of the time through scientific novels. Unger's specialty was to renaturalize highly technological discoveries or products like Germanin, a cure for the sleeping disease, as if they had been discovered within nature and not artificially in sterile chemical facilities, at which the German industry excelled in the early 20th century. The cure for the infamous sleeping disease, trypanosomiasis by scientific name, is a subject of Unger's hagiographical scientific history novel, Germanin, Geschichte einer deutschen Großtat, or Germanin, History of a Great German Bee, from 1938. The novel uses an omniscient narrator to tell the highly romanticized story of the discovery of this cure and the development of Bayer, the producer of said cure. The company was to symbolize German values through a highly romanticized story of humble beginnings and craftsmanship, all of which eventually served the German nation. The story is driven by scientific hero figures, like Robert Koch, for example, who show their personal valor, skill, and Germanness through fictional interactions with other researchers and colonial protagonists. The implicit but often very explicit goal of the novel is to prove that it was a historic mistake to rob Germany of her colonies. In the words of Unger, how could anyone claim that a nation that had developed such an important cure was unworthy, as was written in the Treaty of Versailles, of colonial possessions? Through close reading, we will analyze the perception of the colonial environment as it is represented in both novels. One of which is in favor of colonization, Germanin, the other critical of colonial practices, Tropenwee. Regardless of their political stance, they stage a tropical environment by means of depictions of the indigenous, the local fauna and flora, the occult and other stereotypical aspects of the colony as pax pro toto for the colonial environment, ever stressing their interconnectedness. Furthermore, both novels emphasize disease as being part of this universe, exemplified by their titles. Tropenwee refers to the mental and physical illnesses to which especially white colonials fell victim, often with fatal results. Many pseudoscientific names or concepts like Tropenwee or German Tropenkoller express the deteriorating mental and physical effects of the tropical environment on white colonials and illustrates the emergent status of tropical medicine in the early 20th century. Germanin, on the other hand, was written 34 years later and reflects the progress that tropical medicine had gained. Germanin presents the universal cure, between brackets, against the so-called sleeping disease, and is an important step in the scientific control over colonial environments. These differing views on disease and the colonial environment as a whole will lead to very different conclusions concerning colonial morality and the presence of white colonials in sub-Saharan Africa. The quotes I will be using today will all be in Dutch, French, and German, but I will always provide you with an English translation on the PowerPoint. So let's get started. 5 jeunes Hollandais arrivés à Kinshasa au moment de mon départ de Brazzaville étaient morts à mon arrivée. Before the first chapter starts, the novel of Tropenwee starts, the novel quotes from a published report of commercial caravan in French Congo in 1898, Vers le Nil français avec la mission marchande by C.H. Castellani. This teaser not only sets the tone for the story, in which an untimely death looms, but also indicates how illness is only a problem for white colonials. The topos of sub-Saharan Africa as white man's grave was considered a hindrance for the colonial enterprise and a threat for political and economic expansion and stability in the colonial territories. All colonial nations therefore established scientific institutes for research on possible tropical diseases. In Belgium, for example, the Instituut voor Tropische Geneeskunde, which was first established in Brussels, then in Antwerp because of its access to the harbor, and the Institute in Hamburg, which in turn was also first established in Berlin, but then in Hamburg because of the harbor and the access point to the colonies. Tropenwee, or tropical agony, carries several meanings, ranging from a sense of melancholy to different kinds of fevers and the enduring effects of this affliction. The novel describes tropical diseases affecting both the mind and body of white colonials. Most of the protagonist's acquaintances are dead by the end of the novel, and his own life is in danger from the moment he gets infected with malaria. In the beginning of the novel, in a chapter called Hoe de ziekte komt, or How the Disease Comes, the protagonist finds himself on a boat, traveling to the lower factories in the inner Congo for his trading company. He can feel he is becoming ill by the bitter taste in his mouth, the heavy nausea, and profuse sweating, which makes him feel hot and cold at the same time. His traveling companion, Fourneau, warns him of what is ahead. C'est le climat qui en est la cause, revat Fourneau, en schetsend ging hij door. Je suis en train de lire quelque chose sur le sujet. Écoutez, tous ceux qui pénètrent dans le centre de l'Afrique ont tôt ou tard à lui payer leur dette. Quelque forte que soit leur constitution, le climat des tropiques les tuera ou les stigmatisera gravement pour toute la vie. Fourneau, a bona fide colonial in the eyes of the protagonist, quickly realizes how serious the situation is as his traveling companion's symptoms deteriorate and he eventually faints. Oui, regardez-le. C'est bien ça, il paye sa dette à ce pays. Il n'y a pas de doute, il est très malade, il paye sa dette. The notion of debt thus refers to a physical component, as every white colonial is bound to become ill or fatally ill, and a moral component, as coming to the tropics is presented as a form of transgression, a forbidden act. Sarah de Mul, who compares Tropenwee to Conrad's Heart of Darkness, claims that Congo was a topos of dystopic transgression in the fin de siècle era, an invented space of antagonism to the European imagination, a place devoid of morality and of barbarism. De Mul goes on that despite the critical and subversive tone, the stereotypical characterizations of the colonial environment as being secretive, mysterious, unknowable, dense, and dark, black characters do not have individual names or personal characteristics, and in many instances the indigenous appear and disappear before the protagonist. They blend in and pop out of their surroundings. The impression is that to a certain extent that they literally belong to nature. Hence, once again, that parse theme. To add to this point, the indigenous indeed seem to be one with nature and thus seemingly immune to its diseases. As the white bodies struggle to stay alive and the white minds struggle to stay sane, the black bodies thrive, but their minds remain unknowable. In Tropenwee, nature is presented as a hive mind, with each component moving to its rhythm and collective, never individual consciousness. The protagonist remarks throughout the novel how the black bodies shine in the sun and how they easily take care of heavy physical duties. De lange, welgemaakte, glimmende, kaalgeschoren koppen, daarop scheen dadelijk de felle zon en geen enkel hunger hinderde dat. Geen één dacht aan bedekking. Jules herkende in zich de angst van elke blanke man voor de tropenzon, hoe ieder zich nooit zonder brede, witte helm buiten wagen zou, uit vrees voor de zonnesteek. The collecting of such debts, of a white man's debt, can be slow, but the price the white colonials have to pay for their transgression is inescapable and enduring. Once the protagonist is back in Europe, he still suffers, mentally and physically, from his illness. Moreover, he has lost all his money and nearly all of his possessions to the illness. The homecoming, as the final chapter is called, is very bitter and marked by a sense of loss and deterioration. Toen hij zich waste voor de spiegel, zag hij zijn gezicht. Geel was het, met aan de jukbeenderen rode vlekken. Zonder genade was het tropenklimaat voor hem geweest. Bij zijn inscheping in Antwerpen had hij lang, donker haar gehad. Nu was er veel grijs en wit tussen, maar dat zou wel weggaan. Zijn tanden hadden het ergst geleden. Daar zou nooit meer iets aan te doen zijn. Until the end of the story, the protagonist suffers from feverish dreams about his time in Congo as he realizes that malaria has marked him for life. These dreams also touch upon the psychological toll the colony exerts. It often remains unclear if the symptoms are to be attributed to physical distress in the form of high fevers and hallucinations, for example, or the post-traumatic shock of the horrors of colonization, ranging from economic exploitation to the torturing and killing of the indigenous. Upon the protagonist's return in Antwerp, for example, he compares the start of his journey to the moment of his return in Antwerp and assesses the colonial system. Het was alsof het aankomen van een schip uit Congo geen vreugde bracht. Al lag het ruim rijk geladen met duizenden kilo's ivoor, massa's caoutchouc en allerlei gewas ter tropen. Even dacht hij er met bitterheid aan hoe heel die lading, al dat kostbaars, veel mensenlevens had gekost. En voor hem reizen de visioenen van rampzalige inboorlingen die, aangehitst door de wapens der Belgische ambtenaren, de donkere, vochtige bossen waren ingejaagd. Terwijl hun vrouwen en kinderen, hongerend en ook gemarteld, in nauwe pakhuizen samengedreven, dikwijls stierven voor wat verlangd werd, uit de kaalgeroofde wouden ingezameld was. The feeling of paralysis is nowhere to be found in Germanin, which takes off with a dizzying survey of the universe, the earth, and mankind. The omniscient narrator leaps from vast spaces in the cosmos to the microscopic dimensions of life on Earth, voyaging from Europe to Africa, stopping on historic locations like Lisbon to honor national heroes like Vasco da Gama, for example, and for their and honor them for their contributions to both their individual nations and mankind at large, all the while sounding emotional and enthusiastic. Unger does not shy away from exclamation marks in his novel. The paradoxical link between universality and nationalism is one of the dominant themes in the novel. In that same first chapter, notions of Darwinian struggles within African nature are introduced, with an account of yearly natural deaths by predators and how the indigenous have crafted weapons and other ways to defend themselves against these threats. In light of this natural order, and the alleged tens, hundreds, and thousands of people that die each year because of this struggle, the narrator introduces the staggering hundreds of thousands of victims that the sleeping disease claims each year. The plague is described as unnatural, unfair, and universally threatening to all living creatures in Africa, exemplified by the tiny fly that spreads the sleeping disease, which is also features right here on the novel. Furthermore, it makes a white colonial intervention natural and necessary. Im ewigen Daseinkampf mit der Natur hat der schwarze Mensch das Fürchten vor seinen großen Feinden beinahe verlernt und sich Waffen der Abwehr und der Vernichtung geschaffen. Gegen seinen grausamsten, kleinsten Feind blieb er immer wehrlos, und erst der weiße Mann musste kommen, zu helfen, diesen Gegner zu erkennen, aufzuspüren und zu vernichten. Nicht das unendlich Große, nein, das unendlich Kleinste wird hier zum Zerstörer der Welt. Contrary to Tropenwee, the indigenous and Europeans are placed in the same category of humanity and the human race, in order to present them as being just as susceptible to the sleeping disease. This setup and claim to universality of the disease is necessary to give weight to the universality of the cure, which heightens the prestige and moral claim for German recolonization in Africa. The need for such a claim rose from Germany's loss of its colonies, as I've mentioned, in 1919. At which point it also lost all of its scientific patents, which allowed other European nations to develop similar, yet in the eyes of the narrator, less effective cures to sleeping disease and other tropical diseases. To add insult to injury, Germany was also specifically accused of being unworthy and morally unfit of possessing said colonies in the Treaty of Versailles, which is mentioned, by the way, approximately 15 times in the book. Paradoxically, claims to universality helped strengthen national colonial claims, as it provided the motherland with a moral edge over other European powers. One of these universal, yet presented as also being very German values, is the ideal of the brotherhood. Of doctors and the political neutrality of their cause, as they strive for the betterment of humanity. In the chapter Ärzte, Forscher, Kameraden, doctors, researchers, comrades, the narrator praises the persisting networks between German doctors and researchers and their European counterparts in the former German colonies since 1919. Even in the extreme circumstances of the colonial environments, German researchers hold true to their beliefs and universal values. Wer da unten einmal, abseits von jeder hohen Politik, mit anderen auf Vorposten gestanden hat, der ist und bleibt ihnen Mensch zu Mensch verbunden. Besonders wenn es Ärzte sind, die ja einhellig verschworen gegen Krankheit und Sterben sein sollten. Höchstes Arzttum ist höchstes Christentum. Wahres Arzttum ist noch immer Hilfsbereitschaft für die Menschheit gewesen. Es gab unter den Tropenkameraden viele, die die Leistung der Deutschen neidlos anerkannten. Gut, diesmal wieder waren es deutsche Forscher, welche die Welt mit einer genialen Tat überraschten. An der Großtaten der Wissenschaft überhaupt waren aber alle Völker beteiligt. The true purpose of Germanin is voiced through the indigenous, the main patients of the cure. Oh yeah, by the way, this is an illustration of the hero figures. There are many illustrations in the book, which I forgot I should pass around. There are many illustrations in the book of German hero figures, the formula of Germanin. Also, very interestingly, images of microscopic images right there, an image of the fly, and a lot of images of the indigenous people in all their helplessness They are often depicted in different stages of the disease, and it's always emphasized how helpless they would be without white doctors. So a very classic colonial way of looking at things. Yes. Yeah, so the purpose of Germanin is voiced through the indigenous, the main patients of the cure. The omniscient narrator uses them as a voice and argument for German recolonization. As the German scientists venture to the old German colonies to conduct research on the sleeping disease, they are greeted and welcomed as the true masters and colonizers. The name of the cure, Germanin, reflects this. According to the narrator, the German Dr. Asmis wanted a name that would remind the indigenous of the Germans and their good deeds for the colonies. Despite the negative propaganda by the Allies in the First World War, of course. By presenting the indigenous with the gift of Germanin, Germany would mentally return as a true ruler over colonies. Note, by the way, how in Tropenwee the colonial environment demanded payment in the form of mental and physical debt, whereas Germany represents a gift that allows Germany to return to Africa in a colonial state. Here we arrive at the popular topos of German literature and of a popular topos of German literature and film, especially in the 1930s and early 1940s, Germanin. Or other chemical products manufactured by the German medical industry as chemical substitutes for the lost colonies, which Stefan Bessa describes as the psychological method of projecting German colonial desire onto the so-called hygienically suffering Africa. Unger also mentions Dr. Fischer as one of his main sources of inspiration for the novel, who, among other works, wrote Unter der Geisel der Schlafkrankheit, under the scourge of the sleeping disease, in which he sees Germanin as an intravenous resource of superior German care for the indigenous. In other words, without holding physical colonial territories, German colonization could endure under the skin of the indigenous. The uniforms might have changed, but through the cure, the indigenous are forever inscribed with German colonial rule. A final point I would like to make is about the colonial worldview that is determined by tropical medicine. Access to the colonial environment is thus to a large extent determined by the medical tools of its colonizers. In Tropenwee, the protagonist's attempts to reach Inner Congo are cut short by disease. Had there been an effective cure, his journey might have continued. Through snippets of conversation, we can catch a glimpse of the cures that were available in Tropenwee. For example, after the protagonist had already spent a number of weeks in Congo, he has dinner with other colonials. They eagerly discuss the limited effects of quinine, which was a 19th century cure for high fevers and particularly malaria. They also discuss Eno's fruit salts, a more popular source of minerals that was used against all kinds of ailments, ranging from stomach acid to gout and malaria. Maar quinine, hervatte een ander. Als je een lang koorts hebt, dat is fataal. Het werkt op je hart en niet zuinig. Le maître van de SAB, je weet wel, die we in januari in het huis gezet hebben. Nou, die nam altijd maar quinine. Op een keer vertelde ze hem dat zijn hart niet deugde. 2 dagen later was hij ook kapot. En dat komt van de quinine, meneer. Als je het mij vraagt wat het beste is, uitvieren en zweten en eno's. Quinine was a very popular way of dealing with tropical fevers. As you can see here, this is French propaganda. And I don't know if you can read the text below the image. It says, quinine et moustiquaire, moustiquaire et quinine, notre cher militaire vous doit sa bonne mine. So thanks to mosquito nets and quinine, the French colonial can return home safely to his family. This is an illustration of Eno's fruit salts, by the way, which still exists today. It's very popular in India, apparently. So this home remedy, if you will, to malaria, to high fevers, that was used back then, and which is referenced here. The risky medication and faith in fruit salts demonstrates the lack of knowledge concerning colonial ills at the end of the 19th and early 20th century. Germanin, on the other hand, was written over 30 years later, and the effects of the advances of science and tropical medicine become apparent. Thanks to Germanin, the colonial environment has become manageable, accessible, and ripe for a renewed German colonial presence in the eyes of the narrator. The cure of the sleeping disease and the threatening image of the first chapter, with the natural order being disturbed, is restored in a final and very unusual overview of the colonies. An old German man from Flensburg, aptly named Olderman, aims to return to his family in Tanganyika, which used to be part of Deutsch-Ostafrika. He had to leave his farm because of the First World War and the expulsion by the British. Olderman doesn't take the fastest route, which is conveniently justified by the fact that his son had planned the trip for him and the old man did not mind him, to make sure that in the narration of the trajectory, the entirety of the old German colonial empire is evoked and flown over with an airplane. When Olderman arrives, he remembers the colonial world from before Germanin, with its plagues and other hygienic troubles, and he is happy to find that his family lives in a utopian post-Germanin colonial world where the natural order is restored. It is no coincidence that Olderman symbolically carries a small box with the Bayer symbol on it. It is the return of a German and Germany to Africa, thanks to Bayer and Germanin. To conclude, the colonial novels Tropenwee and Germanin are united in their focus on diseases and cures in colonial environments, but the outcome greatly differs. In Tropenwee, entering the colonial environment as a white colonial means indebting yourself for the transgression. Sooner or later, he will have to pay with his physical and or mental health. Disease also symbolizes corruption and atrocities by white colonial as an unnatural and perverse state of being. Conversely, the younger novel Germanin presents diseases like the sleeping disease as disturbing to the natural order in sub-Saharan Africa, which opens up an ideological space for a re-entry of German colonials. The universal cure Germanin, propelled by the universal, although presented as very German, values of doctors and the medicinal fight for humanity, are meant to establish Germany's moral superiority and claim to her old colonies. Tropenwee presents tropical diseases as inevitable and often fatal and confirms a fin de siècle obsession with mortality in the form of an African white man's grave. Its characters improvise with fruit salts and have limited knowledge about quinine at best, which is presented as a health risk. Germanin, on the other hand, shows the later potential of a medical industry and highly technological research for a cure that could, at least theoretically, cover an entire continent. Whatever the narrative and ideological outcome, both novels are marked by the development of tropical medicine in the early 20th century. Thank you.